You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the economist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Telegraph claimed that violent prisoners will be released early as the government take action to address the prison's overcrowding crisis. That also takes the lead in the Daily Mail, who carry the headline, Labour accused of scare tactics over full jails, and a warning 20,000 inmates could be released. And in the Times, there's the claim that prisoners are to be freed after serving 40% of their sentence, and the changes could be implemented within weeks. There's more trouble for the new government in the eye as they say that Sir Keir Starmer faces mutiny on child benefit from Labour backbenchers. In The Guardian, there's more on that rise in water bills as politicians and campaigners claim there is contempt for customers. The Bristol Post leads with the discovery of 2 suitcases containing human remains on the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Meanwhile, the Express carries a call for a ban on crossbows following the shocking events in Bushey, with a claim the deadly weapon can be bought in just 2 minutes. According to the Financial Times, the UK economy grew by 0.4% in May, twice the expected figure, as the pound hit its highest level against the dollar for a year. The Metro carries the King's good wishes for the England team ahead of the Euros final on Sunday. The headline, May you reign over Spain. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Steve Richards and Salma Shah. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the prisons story on many of the front pages, but the Times first of all. And I guess the headline that prisoners are to be freed after serving only 40% of their sentence is the one that's going to perhaps worry people and is perhaps the shocking element of this.
Yeah, unavoidable, inevitable. The prisons are packed. And you can't build a prison overnight. So what do you do? And the government, this new government, is doing 2 things. One is a framing that they're basically, with justification, blaming it on the previous government, leaving them with this dilemma. But the other is potentially, and it'd be fascinating to hear Salma, who's worked in the Home Office, whether this is a moment when you can reframe the debate about how you deal with prisoners, because our prisons have been packed for years. And then the reoffending rate is very high when they come out. Now, we've got a new prisons minister interested in arguments and themes around rehabilitation. Whether this is a moment when you have to cut through the hysteria of these front pages, that there is a new way of dealing with offenders rather than cramming them in these unsustainably overcrowded prisons.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point, because it is about how Sir Keir Starmer is going to frame this. I am slightly disappointed. I can understand the logic of why he's saying, well, you know, the Conservatives left me with this mess, and indeed they did. But I would have liked to see him lean into a little bit more around that appointment that he made of Timpson, and the fact that actually he's looking at a new system and he's asking himself the wider question, which is, does the prison system still work? Are we getting the right thing out of it?
But isn't that implicit in his appointment of Timpson, because that's his major
but I think
cause,
if you have this against that, these headlines against that, saying that you're going to have, you know, a huge proportion of the prison population that were serving custodial sentences of 4 years, only serving 40% of that, I think you have to be much more active in pushing it, because a lot of people, they won't even know who the prisons minister is. You know, not everybody is watching the news in as much detail as we are. So I think he needs to really take this opportunity to talk about what his vision is for the future, because Steve's right, this has been really, really difficult. And one of the hard things that Labour's going to have to do now is think about what is this going to cost if they really want to transform the state? And they're still, you know, in a precarious position on the finances. I don't think the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is going to want to spend any money, but unfortunately that is what it may take. And perhaps they're not ready to say that yet, but signalling a little bit more that reform agenda, I think, would be good.
I mean, possibly that's what we will hear some more of from Sabanesh Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, tomorrow.
We'll have to. I mean, I think there's a sequencing. First, you establish culpability, that they are facing something that was not of their making. They've only been in power for a few days. So you establish that this is what they are facing, with no easy route ahead. They knew, by the way, in advance that they would be facing this nightmare within a week or two. And then I hope, as Salma hopes as well, which is interesting, they do reframe the argument. I think they will have to. They can't just say, look, this is a complete nightmare. We'd prefer to lock them all up, but we're letting them all out. I mean, that argument's not going to work. But they knew it would be tough with the newspapers, as it is tonight. So they have to establish culpability with the previous lot. And then, I hope, make the arguments that this is the beginning of a whole new approach.
Yeah, and then when we look at the Daily Telegraph, the sort of headlines that are really going to scare people. Violent prisoners will be freed early. The Telegraph reporting that the Justice Secretary will be announcing this, that measures would free criminals, some convicted of violent offences.
Yeah, I mean, the government has said that they are not going to do that. They've said that there's a specific carve-out for violent offenders, sexual offenders, and those accused of terrorism, and in some instances, domestic abusers as well.
So misinformation by the Telegraph?
Well, perhaps, because... but they've obviously gone big on this headline, so maybe the catch-all doesn't remove all violent prisoners, and levels of violence as well, I think, would have to be considered. But I think what's interesting about this is actually the sub underneath the headline, which is police are warning of a breakdown of law and order. So if you are taking people and bringing them out of prison, and a custodial sentence of 4 years is still quite a significant sentence, and they're only serving 40%, and all of a sudden this huge number of people back in the community, I think the police are right to raise that worry. I hope it doesn't materialise, but I hope as well that the government has some kind of mitigation plan, because certainly people are going to be worried. It's on the front page of the Times, the Telegraph, and possibly the Mail as well.
I bet they announced some kind of mitigation plan to accompany this. It is quite sudden, although, as I say, they knew they were going to have to deal with this before they got into power. This is a moment where you then have to put a case. But clearly, when you have headlines like that, it's going to frighten a lot of people, because I think there will be a lot of people coming up. But there is no alternative route. These prisons are just insanely cramped. And in fairness to a whole load of prison inspectors, you'd have probably dealt with them. They've been saying this for a long time, but it's now reached a point of unsustainability. So there really is no choice.
But the Conservatives saying that Labour are scaremongering, you know, saying that there will be a collapse of law and order within weeks, and, you know, the prisons are set to overflow, and there'll be chaos within weeks. They're suggesting that is scaremongering, Salma.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because I think that, you know, the scare tactics around full jails, that's a decision that the government has to take, because if you've got only a couple of hundred places left all around the UK, and you've got a justice system that is still convicting people and requiring custodial sentences, you do need that to work. I think this is the moment, as Steve says, that it's been brought to the public's attention in a much more stark way than has been previously, even though we know that this problem has been happening underneath the surface. And it might allow for that conversation to say, let's think about how we do this differently. And actually, the next time there's a spending review, the Chancellor is going to prioritise prisons. I think the political question is going to be, how much do you sell on prioritising prisons versus, say, the NHS? And that's the kind of deft handling that's going to be required.
OK, let's move on to the eye, and possibly the first rumblings from the backbenchers for Sir Keir Starmer to be faced, and this is on their child benefit. Steve?
Yeah, this is very interesting, because only just, of course, but I'm old enough to remember the last Labour government, which won a landslide in 1997. And the first significant revolt was over benefits. And, yeah, it was a big revolt. But, of course, they had a landslide, so it didn't change the policy. But it put pressure on then Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and others are hugely aware of the pressure. I mean, they're getting it from Gordon Brown, who is, you know, one of the figures they revere. So they're aware of it. But I can understand from their point of view. We've been talking about all the demands. You know, someone was saying NHS or prisons. Well, this is an expensive measure, and I can understand why they're not able to rush into it at the beginning of the term. I'm sure they're going to do it at some point, but not at this point. There will be, if there is a contrived vote, there will be a rebellion, as there was in 1997, but not enough to change the policy, unless Rachel Reeves announces it in her budget, which is not impossible, but I think unlikely, given how tough she's going to be on public spending at first.
Salma, do you think that's unlikely that we'll see that as soon as the...
We're talking about a minimum of £2.5 billion to reverse this policy. I do not know where she will find that money, given all the other pressures she's got. I understand, you know, that because of this large majority, also people feel there's a thing in Parliament where actually MPs feel more able to rebel or, you know, try and bounce prime ministers into things because they don't think they're going to wreck the government in any way by doing it. So I understand that people want to make that point and they have every right to. But this is too significant a cost.
Quickly, just we've got time to have a look at the FT front page. Steve, you've got about 40 seconds. The economy is looking good for Labour.
Rishi Sunak will wake up and read that front page and think, why didn't I wait a bit longer with these kind of economic good news coming through? This is if it's sustained for longer, this is really good news for the government, substantial good news, because, of course, growth is its number one mission, and that raises tax revenues, and you're into a virtuous cycle. Some think it's going to get worse again by the autumn, but this is, you know, quite upbeat and unexpectedly so, I think the FT is saying.
And the Conservatives would say not of Labour's making, but that's another discussion.
They can say that, it's fair enough, but they've been in for 5 days.
And they will.
Yes, Steve and Salma, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, is it fair to ask people to pay nearly £20 a year more for their water supply? We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Steve Richards and Salma Shah. We just want to bring you an update on President Biden, who will be speaking later this evening. But he's just given a short address at the NATO summit, announcing support for President Zelensky. But he did commit a new gaffe, which fueled concerns about his capacity. Let's take a listen.
That's what the compact says, loudly and clearly. And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
OK, well, let's get the thoughts of Salma and Steve. I mean, he realised his mistake almost instantaneously and tried to row back from it, but...
Look, in any instance that you can allow people to make errors, I think in this particular context where he is being judged, his nomination is being judged as a Democrat who's going to be put forward for president again, I think this is cataclysmic for him, because this is not just something that he's gotten wrong for the first time. This is a series of errors, and I think it's going to be another thing for his detractors and people who are asking him to stand down to say, we just can't have this anymore.
Steve, what do you think watching that?
I'm kind of almost laughing to introduce Zelensky as Putin. Now, I know, of course, he did correct it, but I mean, it's almost a sort of comical error. And of course, if it was the first time, it would be nothing. It would be a funny, but nothing more than that. But in the context where he is fighting to hold on to this, in effect, candidacy for the second term, it's really damaging for him.
Do you think this is it now, Salma? That the Democrats will speak their mind and just see this as one gaffe too many?
The thing is, they have already started speaking their mind. I mean, we've seen in the last few days previous supporters, you know, famous celebrities in the form of George Clooney, Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker. They've all sort of come out and intimated that, you know, this is not safe anymore as a candidacy. But their system is so different to ours that only the president can basically, and the nominee, can decide that he's not going to run. There aren't the men in grey suits like we have in our system. You know, when Liz Truss had her mini budget, somebody went to go and see her and said, it's time to go because we have a parliamentary constitution, a parliamentary system. It's not the same there. So he has to decide, and this has to feature in that decision.
OK. Steve, let's just finish off on The Guardian and take a look at this story regarding the water companies' bills to rise, average of, I think, £19. The water companies saying that it should be more.
Yeah, well, two things will be true at the same time. Water companies are showing contempt and have done, frankly, since this privatisation happened. It was a disastrous privatisation in the late 1980s, followed it closely, where poorly run state monopolies were replaced by these even worse run private monopolies. However, we need to raise the money to modernise these systems, to clean our rivers and seas. And so I'm afraid one route to raising the money is going to have to be price rises.
OK. Steve and Salma, thank you very much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you again in the 11 o'clock hour.